I always considered my father to be an honest and conscientious man. He was a role model for me, teaching me what it meant to be responsible and upright. But life sometimes throws such surprises that you have to rethink your beliefs. It all started about a year ago, when I began thinking about buying a house. It had been my longtime dream to have my own home, where I could create comfort and peace. I found a suitable option and decided to start the process of getting a mortgage. I went to the bank, filled out all the necessary documents, and waited for a response. However, instead of the joyful news of a preliminary mortgage approval, I received an unexpected letter from the bank. The letter stated that I was denied the mortgage due to a low credit score. This was incredibly strange, because I always carefully monitored my finances, never missed payments, and tried to keep my credit cards in order. Puzzled, I decided to check my credit report. When I opened the report, I couldn't believe my eyes. There were 3 credit cards opened in my name that I knew nothing about, and all of them were in default. I was in shock. How could this happen? Who could use my information to get credit? The report also indicated that one of these cards had already been sent to collections. Understanding the seriousness of the situation, I immediately contacted the bank to dispute these cards. However, the bank informed me that the disputes were closed after debt verification. I didn't know what to do next. Thousands of thoughts were spinning in my head. Who could have done this? Why did this happen to me? How do I now fix my credit history and get a mortgage? I decided to discuss this situation with my parents. My parents divorced a few years ago, and each of them had their own life. I called my mom and told her everything. She listened attentively and said it seemed suspicious to her. Mom remembered that my father had previously opened credit cards in her name without her knowledge, which was one of the reasons for their divorce. She told me he had accumulated about $50,000 in secret card debt, which was a real shock for her. After talking with my mom, I dialed my father's number. When I told him about the situation, his reaction was completely different. He said that these things happen, and that I should be more careful with my social security number. His words just enraged me. I had always been careful with personal data, never sharing it with strangers. But now I realized that someone had used my information, and it was likely my own father. A few days later, I casually mentioned to my father that I was going to report the credit cards to the police. He told me it was not a good idea because $15,000 was not a big amount in the grand scheme of things. When I explained that this was preventing me from buying a house, he suggested waiting a few years for it to disappear from the credit report. It will take only 4.5 years, he said. But I couldn't wait that long. I needed to resolve this problem as soon as possible. Realizing that I couldn't just sit back, I told my father that I would go to the police. He directly asked me not to do this and just to be more careful in the future. His reaction only strengthened my suspicion that he was indeed involved. When I informed him that I had already received documents from the credit agencies, he finally admitted that he had opened these cards to cover living expenses last year. He said his work had slowed down, and he had been forced to find other ways to finance himself. He also promised to do everything possible to pay off the debt, but asked me not to go to the police because it would ruin his life. I was at a loss. On the one hand, I needed to protect my interests and restore my credit history. On the other hand, this meant that my father could end up in jail. Nevertheless, I decided that justice must prevail, and I went to the police. The process of filing a report was quite simple. I went to the police station, and in 10 minutes, an officer took my statement. We talked for about 15 minutes, and he made copies of all my documents. The case was assigned to a detective, and I was given instructions on how to deal with the credit agencies. They also gave me a report number that I could use to dispute the accounts. The detective promised to contact me within the next couple of weeks. I asked the officer what would happen to my father. He said the case looked quite clear, but the decision on charges would be made by the state prosecutor's office. If they decided to press charges, an arrest warrant would be issued. If this was his first offense, he would likely receive probation or pretrial diversion. He probably wouldn't spend much time in jail, but would serve some time behind bars. I decided that this was acceptable to me, as it was clear that my father had done this intentionally. I hoped it would be a lesson for him. Using the report number, I began disputing all the accounts. During the last check of my credit report, one card had already disappeared. The other cards and accounts were still there, but I hoped they would disappear in the coming weeks. The prosecutor's office contacted me, asking a few additional questions, and inquired whether I was willing to testify if charges were brought against my father. I agreed, and they promised to make a decision by the end of the month. After my father found out about this, he scolded me and stopped talking to me. One of my brothers was also angry and didn't speak to me for a week. The rest of my family, including my mom, understood my actions. But the most unpleasant thing was that one of my other brothers discovered 2 credit cards in his name that he hadn't opened. His credit score dropped by 150 points. He started dealing with this, and although there was no evidence against my father yet, everything pointed to him. I was still in shock that my father could do this to us, but I was moving forward and hoping to buy a house by the end of the year. After I filed the police report, several weeks passed. I tried not to think about it and continued with my daily life. But one morning, I received a call from the detective handling my case. He said they had found additional evidence confirming that my father had indeed opened credit cards in my name. He also informed me that the prosecutor's office had decided to press charges against him. I needed to appear in court to testify. It was a difficult decision, but I knew I had to do it to restore my credit history and seek justice. On the day of the trial, I felt nervous and uncertain. I had never been in such a situation before, but I knew I had to do it for the sake of my future family and home. There were many people in the courtroom. When it was my turn to testify, I tried to gather my thoughts and calmly present all the facts. I talked about how I discovered the credit cards, how I tried to dispute them, and how I ended up in that courtroom. My father sat on the defendant's bench and didn't look me in the eye. I could see that he felt depressed and upset, but I knew I had made the right choice. The court proceedings lasted several hours. The prosecutor presented all the evidence, and my father's lawyer tried to justify his actions. In the end, the judge delivered the verdict. My father was found guilty of fraud and sentenced to probation and restitution of all the debts. After the court, I felt relieved. It had been a tough ordeal, but I had managed to get through it. Now I had to focus on restoring my credit history and continue searching for a suitable home. But that wasn't the hardest part. The hardest part was mending relationships with my family. After the court, the relationship with my father became even more strained. He didn't want to talk to me and avoided all contact. My brothers were also in confusion. One of them was still angry with me for going to the police. Others supported me but felt uncomfortable due to the tension that had arisen. I decided that something needed to be done to fix the situation. My brothers and I gathered at Mom's house to discuss what had happened. I understood that we all needed time to come to terms with what had happened and to rebuild trust. We talked for a long time, sharing our feelings and emotions. Gradually, we began to understand each other. Mom supported me all this time. She understood how difficult it was for me to make the decision to go to the police and respected my choice. She also tried to maintain a relationship with my father, although it was not easy. Several months later, I decided to meet with my father. It was a difficult decision, but I knew we had to try to rebuild our relationship. We met at a CAF GC, and I started the conversation. I explained to him why I did what I did and how hard it was for me to make that decision. He listened to me and, to my surprise, admitted his guilt. He said he regretted his actions and was willing to do whatever it took to regain my trust. Several months had passed since I filed the police report. My credit history began to recover, and I started looking for a home again. This time I was confident that I could get a mortgage and fulfill my dream. One day I came across an ad for a house that was perfect for me. It was in a quiet neighborhood, with a cozy yard and a large garage. I contacted the real estate agent and arranged a viewing. When I saw the house, I immediately knew it was exactly what I was looking for. It was bright and spacious, with lots of windows and a cozy atmosphere. I imagined living there, inviting friends and family for dinners, and enjoying every day in that house. I applied for a mortgage, and a few weeks later, I received approval. It was an incredible feeling, VJ. My dream was finally coming true. I signed all the necessary documents and became the owner of my first home. Moving into the new house marked the beginning of a new life for me. I decided that I wanted to start everything from scratch and rebuild trust with my family. My father and I started meeting and talking more often. Gradually, our relationship improved. He tried to make amends by helping me with repairs and setting up the house. We started spending more time together, and I felt our trust beginning to rebuild. My brothers also supported me in this. We started gathering more often, spending weekends and holidays together. I felt our family becoming strong and close again. The process of rebuilding relationships was long and difficult, but I knew it was worth it. We all made mistakes, but it was important to learn from them and move forward. Life started to get better. I found a new job that allowed me to better manage my finances and achieve new goals. I started planning for the future, making plans for the development and improvement of my home. I wanted to make it not just a place to live, but a cozy corner that I always wanted to return to. I decided to take up gardening and arrange the yard. I planted several trees, set up a small vegetable garden, and flower beds. It became a real hobby for me. I enjoyed every moment spent outdoors, watching my plants grow and bloom. I also decided to take up sports and started running in the mornings. It helped me not only stay in shape, but also find inner harmony. Running became a kind of meditation for me, during which I could think about my plans and goals. The experience I went through taught me a lot. I realized how important it is to be attentive to your finances and personal information. I also understood that many people face similar problems and need support and advice. I decided I wanted to help other people who found themselves in similar situations. I started writing articles on financial literacy, sharing my experience and tips on credit history recovery. I also began speaking at seminars and conferences, talking about my experience and urging people to be careful with their finances. My experience showed me that even in the most difficult situations, there is always a way out. The main thing is not to give up, to fight for your rights, and not be afraid to ask for help. I hope my story will help other people cope with difficulties and find their way to a bright future. Several years have passed since I discovered the credit cards opened in my name. It was a difficult time, full of trials and worries, but it taught me a lot and made me stronger. Now I live in my cozy home, enjoying every day and planning for the future. I rebuilt relationships with my family, found inner harmony, and discovered new goals and hobbies. I also help others by sharing my experience and knowledge. Life goes on, and I am ready for new challenges and adventures. I believe that bright and joyful moments await me, and I am ready to meet them with a smile and confidence.